Oh, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope you're doing well. It is Monday, the 4th of October, 2021. Can you believe that? We've got another 2 months for the rest of the year. 2 months, 60 days, where we can turn this life around, where we can turn our businesses around and make 2021 the best year ever. Now, I have a belief, and it is how you end one year is how you start the next year. And what I mean by that is how you end 2021 is going to be how you start 2022. And if this year's a shit of a year, if it finishes off bad, if you finish off hopeless, if you finish off with no direction, once that clock strikes midnight and the calendar ticks over to the 1st of January 2022, your new year is going to start shit. You're going to have no direction, you're going to have no sense of purpose, and you're going to hate the year because essentially you've started off on the wrong foot. So, for those of you who are joining me today, good afternoon. How are you doing today? Jenny, wonderful to see you there with us. Andrea Kelly, wonderful to see you there also. For those of you who are joining me for the first time, say hello. If you're joining me live on the live stream, type in live into the comments section below. If you're watching me on the replay, type in replay so I know that you're catching up on this excellent information. Now, today's topic is change. Now, what I've learned is that 69%, imagine that, fully 69% of the adult population feel trapped in their old routines. So if you're feeling trapped, I want you to go to the chat box and type in trapped into the chat box. I've also learned that 3 out of 10 people are happy with their lives. That means 7 out of 10 people are not happy in their lives. I've also learned that 84% of the population feel stuck in their career. So if you're feeling stuck in your career right now, here's the good news. You're not the only one. But with what I'm going to share with you today is ideas so you can get out of that rut in your life. So thank you for joining me. Connie, congratulations on your first Facebook Live. Well done. Top job. Jenny, 7 out of 10. Excellent. Ramesh, trapped. Jenny, trapped. Yes. Geraldith, live. Thank you for joining me. Connie, good afternoon to you. We want to get out of that stuck spot. So there's 3 things. There's 3 things that you're going to take away from today's training session. 1, you're going to learn how to get back to a normal life. Imagine that. Imagine getting back just to a normal life. No problems, smooth sailing, everything is good, regular sex. You're also going to learn how to get out of the pit of despair. Now, because of COVID, because of the pandemic, because of the things that have been happening around the world, the change in the economy, a lot of people are in the pit of despair. They can't get any lower down in the barrel. They're at the bottom of the barrel. And now the only way is up. I'm going to teach you how to get out of the pit of despair. And then thirdly, you're going to learn how to manage a crisis without the fear of loss. And this is the big one. This is the big one. It's being able to learn how to manage the crisis without a fear of loss. So are you excited? Let me ask you, are you excited to learn these topics? If you're excited to learn these topics, go to the chat box and give me a yes into the chat box. Because in a moment, I'm going to teach you the 5 stages of change. And once you understand what these stages of change are, change becomes simple. It becomes simple because I'm giving you a really good strategy. And once you have a strategy to change, everything becomes easy. So today I'm going to give you the strategy of how to change. I know you're going to love this. So let's rock and roll. Now, what I'm sharing here with you is the 5 stages of change. And I'm going to explain each of these stages of change one by one because you've got to understand where you are on the change curve at any given time. See, with a strategy, you might have the right strategy, but if you're doing the wrong things at the wrong time with the right strategy, nothing will change. You might have the right strategy, but you might be operating from the wrong starting point. You'll never get the result. So let me give you the 5 stages of change. The first part of change is when life is normal. So I want you to go back to 2019. I want you to go back to December 2019. The world was normal. Everything was fine. You had your normal life. You had great relationships with family and friends. You were probably having regular sex and enjoying it. And the money was also coming in to your business, coming in to your bank account. And back in December 2019, you were living a normal life. So go to the chat box and type in normal life. Now, all of a sudden, we had a change and there was a crisis. A crisis all of a sudden came. COVID-19 was totally unexpected. And at that moment of the crisis, there was no coping mechanism. There was no coping mechanism. None of us had been through this before. Nobody knew what to do. And so we had no coping mechanism. And people were sitting around waiting and wondering when life was going to go back to normal. People sat around, they said, this is going to disappear. It's going to be a seasonal flu. It's going to disappear and life's going to be normal. And then people started to wish, I wish my life would go back to normal. But all of a sudden, we realized that we were in a crisis. And this is where we have to learn to cope with the crisis. See, what we found is at this time of the crisis, what people do is they try to do the same things, but better. They try to do business better. They try to do their career better. They try to do relationships better. But it's the definition of insanity. They keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. They keep doing the same thing and just thinking they're just going to do it a little bit better, but nothing changes because nothing changed. Same strategy. The situation, the world had changed, the strategy no longer worked. And so after they try to do things better, what happens is they try to be more disciplined. They say, I'm just going to be a little bit more disciplined. I'm just going to work a little bit longer hours. But nothing changes. It's because we're in a crisis. So please type into the chat box, crisis. Type in crisis. Now, the crisis stage here, it's a dangerous stage because what happens is people don't know how to deal with the crisis. After we've been in the crisis for a long time and we haven't been able to get out of it, we go into what's called the pit of despair. So we're now focusing on stage 3, which is the pit of despair. And once we get into that pit of despair, it's a slippery slope. We start to slide backwards. We lose grip on our thoughts. We lose grip on our feelings. We lose grip on our mindset. We stop taking action. The fear of loss kicks in and we just wish for a better day. And all of a sudden we are at rock bottom. We're at rock bottom and we end up rolling over. We go into a form of hibernation. We put our head in the sand. We wish life would go back to normal. We wish the old life would come back. But we can't go back there. That part of the world has moved on. The world has changed, and now we're at that pit of despair. You look backwards, we're too far to turn around. We look forward, and we're too far away to make a change. We can't see far enough out into the future to make good decisions. And we're in that pit of despair. And still right now, as the end of the crisis is coming near, a lot of people are still stuck in that pit of despair. They've tried a little bit, but they haven't tried enough to get out of that pit of despair. They've tried everything they know, but they haven't tried all the things that they don't know. And it's a very confusing stage in the 5 stages of change. And this is where most people give up. This is where most people give in. This is where people end their businesses, end their careers, and they even end their life wherein they're in this pit of despair. So I want you to go to the chat box and I want you to type in pit of despair. So let me ask you, is it making sense so far? Are you understanding these first 3 stages of change? First of all, life's fine. Life's normal. Secondly, the crisis comes along. Thirdly, you enter that pit of despair. Now, once you're in that pit of despair, the only way is forward. You can't go back. That old life has gone. The only thing you can do now is to move forward. But we need a different strategy, because when we hit this turning point, when we start to climb up out of that pit of despair, the only way is up. The only way is forward. But the road to recovery is long. You don't know what the future holds. There's a form of mental fog. You end up living hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck. You're living day to day. There's a lot of false starts. There's a lot of lost time. It's expensive. You've got to reinvent yourself. You've got to reinvest in yourself. You've got to change your business model. And it's in a very expensive time because you've got to put so much in at the start, but you get very little back immediately. I'm not saying that you don't get it back long term. I'm just saying you got to put a lot in, but you don't get a lot back at this stage. Now, at this stage, and you can see these steps, you got to climb out of that pit of despair. Finally, after you climb out of that pit of despair, you get to the turning point. And this can take weeks. It can take months. It will also take years overcoming these setbacks. And although the end of the crisis is getting closer, a lot of people are going to be impacted by this for the next 2, 3, even 5 years. Some companies, it'll take them a decade to recover from the setback. However, we know the only way is forward. We can only climb up out of this pit of despair. And eventually we get to stage 4, which is the turning point. And that's the exciting part. You start to see the clear blue skies. And finally, once you get through that turning point, you can start to see your new future life. So, to make sure you're with me, I want you to type into the chat box, turning point. I want you to remember that if you're in the pit of despair right now, what follows is the turning point. And at this stage, you've got to reinvent yourself. You have to invest in yourself. You have to acquire new knowledge. You have to acquire new skill. You have to update your mindset. You have to totally reinvent yourself, because the person who you were before the crisis, that person is not valuable in today's market. Why? Because those old problems have disappeared. People's old goals have gone. Business has changed. The world has moved on. And you've got to start to lead the change. You've got to be the person who reinvents themselves faster. You're going to be the person who brings more value than anybody else. And so we call this reinvention. You're going through a stage now where you've got to totally reinvent yourself. 100%, there we go. You stole the words right out of my mouth. You've got to reinvent yourself. Derek, so true. It's the turning point. Ramesh, it's the turning point. Connie, it's the turning point. Jenny, it's the turning point. We must be quick with the facts and slow with the blame. 100%. And we've got to get through that turning point. And once we're through that turning point, then we can move on to a new life. So the goal is the new life. And it would be nice to fast track all the way there. However, we've got to climb up out of that pit of despair. So I went through a crisis a couple of years ago, and I want to paint the picture of what it looked like when I went through the crisis. So Nini and I, it's 2009. We've met in Dubai. We're living in Dubai. We're thinking about our future. We're going to get engaged. We're going to get married. We're going to have babies. And we're going to live in the castle. We're going to drive the big car. We're going to fly around the world. Everything's going to be fine until the crisis came. In 2010, there was a crisis. Nini had an accident on an aircraft, and it resulted in her having a fractured knee and 2.5 years of operations, 2.5 years of rehabilitation. And just as she literally got back up on her feet, she lost her job. She lost her job, and the stress was overwhelming. She was depressed. She come close to miscarrying 3 times. She had to leave Dubai. She had to move back to Taiwan. I was at a crisis. Do I choose family or do I choose my career? I chose family, which meant I had to drop my career. I left my career of co-leading a team of 17,000 people. I moved to Taiwan. I started a business. The business didn't work. I applied for 600 jobs. And by the end of the year, I was in the pit of despair. I had a lot of time, but no money. I lived with my grandparents. I had no money for accommodation, and I was receiving social security. And the pit of despair was a terrible place to be. And as you know, misery loves company. Now, over the next 6 months, I started to climb out of that pit of despair. I tried a lot of things. None of it worked. I tried again. It didn't work. I made money. I lost money. And I got to a stage in September of 2014 where I had to fold. I had to put the cards back on the table, and I had to say, I'm out. I left Australia. We went back to Taiwan. We took jobs teaching English just to be able to pay for rent and food. Once we got enough money back in the bank, we built our business again, and we got to that turning point where all of the years of hard work started to pay off. We could see the blue skies. We could see the sun shining on the horizon. And eventually, we got our new life. But it took us years and years to recover. And here's my point. You're going through a crisis right now. You're probably in that pit of despair. You're probably moving towards that turning point, but it's not over yet. It's going to be weeks and months and years of hard work to start with. And a lot of people just give up on the way and they fall back into that pit of despair. Is this making sense? Is this making sense, or am I just talking to myself? If I'm talking to myself, I'm still crazy. I was crazy before. I'm crazy now, and I'm going to be crazier after the crisis. So is this making sense? Let me ask you, is this making sense? Can you see how these 5 stages of change are taking place in your life right now? Now, these are the 5 stages. Excellent. Andre Kelly, making sense. Ramesh, yes. So these are the 5 stages of change. However, some of these stages are optional. Do you know what's optional? The optional stage here, and you don't have to go through this. You do not have to go through the pit of despair. Now, people choose to go through the pit of despair. And the reason why they choose to go through the pit of despair is because of their pride and because of their ego. It's also not really their fault. It's the fault of society. See, we've been conditioned over the years that asking for help is a sign of weakness. And so what will happen is, out of pride, our ego will get in our way and we will refuse to ask for help. We know there's help out there. We know there's people who can help us get through this crisis. You know there's people out there who can help you get through that pit of despair, even avoid it. But we don't raise our hand because of pride and ego. We try to do everything ourselves, but we become a martyr. We start to say, look at me struggle, look at me struggle, look at me struggle, everybody. And we've also been trained by society to celebrate the struggle. But ladies and gentlemen, the struggle is optional. In my opinion, the struggle is for the idiot. If you choose to stay in that pit of despair when you know there's help, you are an idiot. Mark my words, quote me, I don't care. You're an idiot. If there's help available, but because of pride and ego, it gets in the way and you choose to stay in that pit of despair, you are an idiot. I was an idiot. I'm talking to you as somebody who was an idiot. Because of pride and ego, it got in my way and I got stuck in that pit of despair. But what I've learned is this, is there's a better way. All of us will go through the 5 stages of change. However, the 3rd stage is optional. Life will be normal. A crisis will come along. But we don't have to go into that pit of despair. See, this is where coaching and training plays a big part. You can avoid the pit of despair by asking for help, by raising your hand and saying, I'm stuck. I need help. I don't know what to do. I've never been through this before. Somebody please make my life easy. And it's at this stage here of the crisis, first of all, you've got to recognize, you have to become aware that you're going through a crisis. And then you've got to raise your hand and you've got to ask for help. You've got to ask for support. You've got to ask for coaching. You've got to ask for mentorship. You've got to ask for training, because the pit of despair is optional. And it's only through coaching, it's only through education that you can bypass the pit of despair and you can go straight to the turning point. And this is critical. I've had conversations with my clients from across Australia today. I'm just totally blown away because I'm seeing people earn millions and millions of new revenues during the crisis simply because they asked for coaching. I see people who have totally reinvented their business model. The business model that they entered the crisis in is a totally different business model to they have today as they traffic towards their new life. And all of these super successful people, and I say super successful is because they were smart. And what they did was they just avoided the pit of despair. They put their hand up and said, we don't know how to navigate through this. We would like support. And as a result, they're doing millions and millions and millions of new revenues because they seeked coaching, they seeked mentorship, they seeked guidance, they reinvented themselves, they got new knowledge, they got new skills. And that's how you avoid the pit of despair. So a lot of people, they're going to be struggling 3, 5, and even 10 years from now. They're going to be struggling because of the crisis. They're going to be climbing up that long staircase out of the pit of despair. They're going to make a lot of mistakes. They're going to have to learn and pay the full price. Where still they could right now put their hand up and seek knowledge, skill, education, training, mentorship, coaching. They could ask for it. But because of pride, because of ego, they stay in that pit of despair. So my message for you today is ask for help. If there's any area of your business where you're going into it blind, don't be an idiot. Don't let pride, don't let ego get in your way. Raise your hand and ask for help. There's people who run businesses like yours who are super successful. Raise your hand, ask for support. There's people out there who will help you, but you have to start by asking for help first. So these are the 5 stages of change. Well, there I am. I'm somewhere there. There we go. There's the 5 stages of change. So number 1 is normal life. All of a sudden, that crisis comes along. People who don't know how to navigate through the crisis, for those people who don't ask for help, all of those people end up in the pit of despair. And for them to climb back out of that pit of despair, they can lose their money. They can lose their time. They can lose their hope. They can lose their family. They can lose their friends whilst they don't get their shit together. That turning point for some people may be 3, 5, or 10 years if they try to do it all by themselves. But you can avoid The pit of despair. The pit of despair is optional. It's a choice. You can just raise your hand and ask for help. You can ask for support. So I hope these ideas serve you well. I know that once I learned about the 5 stages of change, I was able to navigate through this blind spots. I was able to get through that fog. I was able to get through those dark days with ease because I knew what was coming up. And if you have a great strategy to apply in your business or in your personal life, it can make the world of difference.